Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Airstrikes by Syrian and the Russian warplanes have killed 17 people in Idlib and Aleppo. The latest spike in violence comes after Syrian forces regained control of the strategic town of Sarakab in Idlib. Turkey has sent nearly 150 vehicles with commandos and ammunition to reinforce its observation posts in northwest Syria. Ankara has also refused to change the borders of its de-escalation zone framed by the Astana and Sochi agreements. In a press briefing, Turkey's presidential spokesman said Ankara will not accept other proposals for the de-escalation zone. He said a new Astana format summit on Syria may take place in March. A protest has been held against the targeting of health facilities in Idlib. The EU has called for an end to the bombings in northwest Syria and the opening of a humanitarian corridor. The crisis is worst in Idlib. Millions are still fleeing the war zone. Meanwhile, the United Nations measures are limited to asking warring parties to de-escalate. More in this report.
The Syrian civil war is almost a decade old. Regime forces have pushed into the last rebel-held bastion of Idlib, and there is intense fighting. Aid groups have warned the latest violence is compounding one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 9-year war. Syrian forces' airstrikes have destroyed dozens of buildings, including hospitals and medical facilities. Protesters denounced the UN for its inability to stop the bombing of hospitals in the war-torn country.
Where are you? Staff members of IHD stand here today to deliver a message for the UN agencies and to the American embassy in Damascus. It is the best thing you can do, only to issue reports and statistics for IDIBs from Idlib city and Idlib province in general.
Idlib province is a dead end for people displaced from other parts of the country, and they have nowhere to go.
Until now, 1.6 million persons that have been displaced from their homes. It is the best thing that you can do, only to issue reports on targeting facilities. Until now, more than 50 facilities, health facilities in particular, have been destroyed completely or nearly completely in Idlib province.
For the protesters, it is unbelievable to think that hospitals and doctors themselves are targets.
On a daily basis, 3 hospitals are becoming out of service due to systematical targeting. We warn of a health catastrophe on the level of the province and a total collapse of the health situation if the offensive will continue in a systematic manner against health establishments.
Last week, a Syrian Oscar-nominated director also raised voice against hospital attacks. Vad al-Kataib questioned the UN's investigation into the bombing of hospitals in Syria.
All the world knows that the only aircrafts so flying over Idlib now are Russian and Assad regime aircrafts. So I don't know what we could expect, but unfortunately we are all here to say that every day there's a hospital still being bombed.
Many humanitarian aid organizations have called for an immediate ceasefire in northwestern Syria, declaring the situation a catastrophe. The EU has also demanded the opening of a humanitarian corridor.
Turkish and Russian delegations will meet tomorrow in Ankara to discuss the escalating situation in Syria's Idlib province. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the talks aim to stop Syrian government aggression and accelerate the political process. Tensions in the region spiked after clashes between Turkish and Moscow-backed Syrian forces in Idlib. Çavuşoğlu said Ankara will do whatever is necessary to end the humanitarian tragedy in Idlib. The remarks came after Syrian forces claimed they regained control of the strategic town of Sarakab.
Our President Erdogan and Putin had previously agreed to hold talks after these meetings if deemed necessary. Our goal is to stop this cruelty and the regime's aggression as soon as possible, resume the constitutional meetings and accelerate the political process in Syria.
Ankara's military has discontinued its joint patrols with the Russian troops after accusing Moscow of not fulfilling promises. Now, moving on, the US says it has killed the deputy leader of Al-Qaeda, Qasim al-Rimi, in a counter-terrorism operation in Yemen. In a White House statement, President Donald Trump said the killing further degrades the movement. Trump's statement says al-Rimi was the leader of Al-Qaeda's Yemen branch and a deputy to its leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. He said under al-Raimi, the group committed unconscionable violence against civilians in Yemen. The president said US and its allies are safer after this killing. He said the Pentagon will continue to track down and eliminate terrorists who want to harm the US. In Jordan, scores of protesters marched to the U.S. Embassy in Amman against President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Holding flags and caricatures of Trump, protesters gathered near the U.S. Embassy and chanted slogans against the plan. They carried banners reading, "The Jordan Valley is for Jordanians, not for Zionists." The peace plan calls for a two-state solution with Israel and a future Palestinian state, but with strict conditions. U.S. presidential advisor Jared Kushner has briefed the UN Security Council on President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Kushner blamed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas for a recent spike in violence which has killed 4 civilians. Jared Kushner met with the ambassadors from the 15-nation council for a private hour-long conversation at the U.S. mission. Speaking to media, Security Council President Mark Beckstein refused to give details but said it was a good exchange of views and questions on the plan. President Abbas is scheduled to brief the UN Security Council over Palestine's reservations surrounding the plan on February 11th. Iraq's top cleric has condemned the deadly violence in the southern city of Najaf. 11 anti-government protesters were killed when followers of cleric Muqtada al-Sadr stormed their sit-in earlier this week. Ali al-Sistani called on security forces to protect demonstrators from any further attacks. His remarks were delivered by a representative during the Friday sermon in the holy city of Karbala. Nearly 500 people have been killed since protests against corruption and unemployment began in October last year. Britain's ambassador to Iran is back in Tehran weeks after he returned to London following his brief arrest by Iranian security forces last month. Rob McCare was arrested after authorities said he attended an illegal anti-government protest in Tehran. But the ambassador said he had attended a vigil for the crash victims. The British government has termed his detention a violation of diplomatic conventions. His departure had fueled speculations that he may not come back. However, in a message on social media, the ambassador said his trip to London was planned some time ago. France's President Emmanuel Macron has warned that European countries cannot remain spectators in any new arms race. Talking to military officers in Paris, Macron said EU must play a direct role to stop nuclear proliferation. He said France has already reduced the number of its warheads to under 300. With the UK's official departure from the EU, France is now the only nuclear power in the bloc.
I would like a strategic dialogue about the role of French nuclear deterrence in our collective security to develop with our European partners who are ready to participate.
The WHO chief has warned that the world is running out of masks and other protective equipment against the novel coronavirus. Speaking in Geneva, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus expressed concern at the possibility of virus spread in poor countries. He confirmed there were 637 deaths and over 31,000 confirmed cases in China. More in this report.
With no signs of the new coronavirus outbreak abating, the disease is claiming dozens of lives each day. China's President Xi Jinping says Beijing is doing everything it can to contain the virus. US President Donald Trump has also acknowledged Xi's efforts in the fight against the virus. Beijing has pumped in billions of dollars into the economy to cushion it from disruption caused by the virus. The People's Bank of China says the outbreak could disturb economic activity, but it will soon return to normal.
We think that the epidemic situation may cause disturbance to China's economic activity in the first quarter, but after the epidemic is brought under control, the economy will return quickly to potential output.
In Japan, another 41 people quarantined on a cruise liner have tested positive for the coronavirus, bringing the total cases to 61.
The remaining result of 171 people were found out and 41 people tested positive for the new coronavirus. We are now preparing to transport these to medical facilities in Tokyo and other prefectures.
In the meantime, the Chinese doctor who first warned of the coronavirus has died from the disease. Li Wanliang was one of a group of whistleblowers who passed on information to his friends about the outbreak in December. His death triggered an outpouring of grief nationwide, with China's National Health Commission expressing its deep condolences. The commission also expressed great respects to medical personnel on the front line of epidemic control.
Malaysia says it will repatriate more than 200 diplomats, officials and their families from mainland China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. Kuala Lumpur says some of them already returned to the country yesterday. The foreign ministry said the safety measure was taken after consultations with the Chinese authorities. Meanwhile, Australia is sending a second chartered flight to evacuate its citizens. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said passengers on the flight back from Wuhan will be quarantined on the Australian mainland. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. In India, the government has charged Umar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti under the controversial Public Safety Act. The order against the former chief ministers of occupied Kashmir came on the last day of their 6-month detention without charges. Hundreds of Kashmiri politicians are in detention since August the 5th after rejecting India's illegal annexation of the valley. 2 more Kashmiri leaders, Ali Muhammad Sagar and Sartaj Madhvi, have also been booked. Under this act, politicians can remain arrested for up to 2 years without trial. The valley is reeling under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 187 days. Inspired from all women sit-in at Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, similar protests have spread across India against the controversial Citizenship Act. Civil activists, students and politicians are holding demonstrations against the law for the last 2 months. The latest women sit-in is being held at Deoband town of northern Uttar Pradesh state. Starting with only 4, the demonstration has gathered over 1,000 women in just 11 days. Similarly, women in Lucknow, Mumbai and Kolkata refuse to end protests till the law is withdrawn. In exchange for the Babri Mosque, the Indian government has given Muslims land 25 kilometers away from Ayodhya. On November 9 last year, the Indian Supreme Court handed over Babri Mosque to Hindus in a controversial decision. The handed over land is currently government agricultural field and located near Dhanipur village in Uttar Pradesh state. Expressing unhappiness, Ayodhya Muslims say there is no point in giving the land so far away from the original site. Hindu fanatics destroyed Babri Mosque in Ayodhya, Uttar Pradesh in 1992, starting riots which claimed 2,000 mostly Muslim lives. In Sochi, Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with Belarus counterpart Alexander Lukashenko amid oil row between the two countries. The row, which is in its 2nd month, has forced Minsk to look for crude from as far afield as the US. More in this report.
Belarus is a major export route for Moscow's oil and gas to Europe. Putin wants to keep Minsk in his orbit, and Lukashenko was for years getting cheap resources and loans in exchange. For Moscow, supporting Minsk costs a couple of $1 billion per year, so it has started to gradually change the way it taxes its oil industry. The changes, in turn, are hurting the Belarus budget. With Belarus presidential elections approaching this year, Lukashenko refused to sign a new oil deal with Russia. From January 1st, Moscow has almost completely halted oil supplies to Minsk. Oil exports to Europe have so far been stable.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has called for a peace deal to end the dispute with Russia over the South Kuril Islands. Speaking at a rally in Tokyo, Abe said Japan will push for negotiations one step at a time to find an acceptable solution. Abe said both nations must reach an understanding and build relations of mutual trust and friendship. He said it is important to further develop joint Russian-Japanese economic projects on the disputed islands. Japan and Russia's dispute over the sovereignty of the 4 Kuril Islands dates back to the end of the World War II. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has criticized U.S. foreign policy of regime change in Venezuela. Speaking in Mexico, Lavrov said Washington is trying to create a pretext for military intervention. Russia and the United States have repeatedly clashed over Venezuela, where oil companies and military continue to support President Nicolas Maduro. Lavrov extended Russia's support for Maduro, saying Washington's attempts to remove him were useless and counterproductive.
Our Western partners also think dialogue is necessary, but with the objective of addressing the criteria for regime change. And I think that is not mediation, but rather an imposition of foreign models. We hear statements from Washington that there are no options but presidential change.
After 3 days of confusion and controversy, former Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg holds a slim lead over the U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders in Iowa caucus. Iowa Democratic Party Chairman Troy Price apologized for the delay, blaming technical glitches in the result reporting app for the debacle. More in this report.
Senator Elizabeth Warren was third with 18%, while frontrunner and former Vice President Joe Biden was trailing in fourth place on 15.8%. Sanders won the popular vote by a margin of 6,000, but was virtually tied on 26% with Buttigieg in the tally for the state's 41 delegates. Only a fraction of a percent separates the left and moderate presidential hopefuls, with both candidates taking 11 delegates.
I'm confident that we're going to do really well here in New Hampshire, having won Iowa. We're going to do very well in Nevada. I think we're going to do a lot better than people think in South Carolina. I think we've got a good shot to win California. And bottom line, I believe that we are well positioned to win the Democratic nomination and to defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
Meanwhile, Buttigieg said his campaign's strong showing was a validation of his candidacy's vision for America.
It has been an extraordinary week, and we are absolutely electrified by the energy that we are coming here with and by the extraordinary validation of this campaign's vision that we had in Iowa on Monday.
Iowa Democrats have rejected Democratic National Committee Chair Tom Perez's call for a recanvassing of the caucus. Democratic candidates have already hit the campaign trail for Tuesday's New Hampshire primary.
In Ireland, voters go to the polls tomorrow to decide who should lead the government in Dublin. It will be the country's first general election since February 2016. Under Ireland's electoral system, voters choose a group of lawmakers to represent their area in the parliament. Voters can specify their second and third choices to allow votes to be transferred to remaining candidates until vacant seats are filled. On February 4th, leaders of Ireland's three largest parties clashed in a final TV debate. Fine Gael leader Leo Varadkar said it was a change election, warning voters not to back Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin. The leaders of both the parties rejected Varadkar's criticism. Catalonia's regional leader, Quim Torra, says a date for an independence referendum must be agreed as part of talks with the Spanish government. In an interview, Torra claimed that the region's path towards secession is irreversible. Yesterday, Torra met with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, who rejects any move towards independence. But Sánchez agreed to hold talks with Catalonia's leaders to discuss the future of the wealthy northeastern region. Catalonia has dominated the Spanish politics since the region briefly declared independence in October 2017. The referendum was later deemed illegal by the courts. The development prompted Spain's biggest political crisis in decades. Poland has adopted and enforced a controversial law restricting judicial independence in the country. President Andrzej Duda approved the new legislation despite criticism from the EU and the Council of Europe. Poland's governing Law and Justice Party passed the bill in the lower house, which had already been rejected by the Senate in December. The country's judges now face fines, demotion, and even the sacking for questioning the government's divisive judicial reforms. The new law also stops judges from being politically active and requires them to declare their affiliation with civil organizations. The Polish opposition has warned the country's civil liberties are now being eroded. In Nigeria, the death toll from a Lassa fever outbreak has risen to 47. The country's Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, says there have been 365 confirmed cases of the acute viral hemorrhagic fever. Last week, the NCDC reported 41 deaths in 19 of the country's 36 states since the beginning of the year, but it said 23 states have now been affected by the outbreak. Lassa fever is a viral hemorrhagic fever belonging to the same family as the Ebola and the Marburg viruses. The disease is endemic to Nigeria, and its name comes from the town of Lassa in the north, where it was first identified in 1969. Greece has detected its first case of African swine fever in a pig on a domestic breeding farm in the northern region of Serres. At a news conference, Agriculture Minister Makis Voridis said measures are being taken to contain the disease. He said pigs within a 3-kilometer radius of the farm have been culled. The minister said trading pork from Serres has also been banned. African swine fever has spread to Eastern Europe in recent years. The pace at which it has spread has alarmed governments and pig farmers. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. In South Africa, sea surfers are attempting for greener rides at the rugged Cape Peninsula. They are switching to handcrafted wooden surfboards, dropping polyurethane boards. This report describes what surfers are doing to make their sport environment friendly.
As dawn breaks over Muizenberg, Cape Town, the conditions are just right for a morning surf. Matthew looks like any other surfer, but with a twist. His surfboard is made from wood.
For me, it reinvigorated my love for surfing because it's a whole new feel. It paddles differently, it rides differently. Yeah, you know, surfing's all about the feel.
Patrick handcrafts each board, and most are made from sustainably sourced Japanese cedar wood found on South Africa's east coast. They're hollowed out to make them lighter, a technique that was abandoned in the early 1950s for newer, more competitive boards. For Patrick, these beautiful boards are all about the design.
Wood is a unique material and we need to design for that. And so the board shapes that I've chosen, I think, are matched towards wood. And so those shapes go really, really well. You know, I wouldn't take a performance shortboard and make it in wood and expect it to be a success.
Patrick has made 850 of these boards over the last decade, not one exactly the same as the other. It's a drop in the ocean if you look at the large-scale production of modern boards, but for surfers like him, this board truly is one of a kind.
In Argentina, witches and wizards have stormed the capital Buenos Aires for a Harry Potter book night. The event celebrates the magical hero and is an excuse for the fans to dress as their favorite characters. More in this report.
Hundreds of Harry Potter fans have left their mundane, day-to-day lives for a chance to become Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, Harry, and other characters from the books. 1,000 followers packed into the Buenos Aires book night event. Many tried on the sorting hat to see which Hogwarts house they truly belonged to, while others got themselves wizarding tattoos. Others learned to prepare magical potions.
We're in Buenos Aires and it's 40 degrees, so everybody is really showing a lot of courage to come dressed up in some of the costumes that you see around here, because they must be absolutely boiling inside.
The 5th annual event has been organised by the British Embassy and took place at the residence of the ambassador, Mark Kent. The idea is to encourage reading and celebrate literature among children and young people.
And it's celebrated in a lot of countries around the world. It's really popular here in Argentina. Normally in the UK, when we celebrate it, it's in February.
The event was rounded off by a cosplay contest. The winners were Professor Horace Slughorn, Dumbledore, Rowena Ravenclaw, and a Dobby.
In Poland, a children's hospice is trying to bring joy to its residents' shortened lives with the help of a very special puppy. Doctors in wards are using pet therapy to provide comfort and companionship to terminally ill patients. Watch this short report.
2-month-old French bulldog, Havana, has begun a career as a therapy dog at a hospital for critically ill children. It was brought in mainly for Zuzia, a deaf and blind girl, and a boy named Ignacy, who suffers from Menkes syndrome. The little companion soon became a source of joy and excitement for the other patients.
Most of the children who live in the hospice home are children who cannot communicate verbally, so we communicate with them through touch. Havana performs really well here because Ignace relaxes when Havana is sleeping by his feet. They can sleep together for many hours.
The idea of adding a puppy to the staff came from Natalia Pasiachnek, head of the hospice, who also specializes in dog therapy. Every resident at the hospice went through an allergy test before doctors gave the go-ahead to the idea.
I was with my Boston Terrier at a therapy dog training, and there was a woman there who had a French bulldog who was, in fact, peaceful and well-adjusted. And I think these types of dogs perform well in dog therapy as dog therapists, especially with children who are sick and not in direct contact with others.
Like every other staff member, Havana will be fully trained, this time to become a fully certified therapy dog once she reaches the age of 1. For now, she spends most of her time sleeping and playing with the patients.
The US stocks have dropped from record highs despite the release of stronger than expected jobs data. The US economy added over 200,000 jobs in January, with wages soaring to over 3%. But drop in the shares of energy, materials and technology sectors dragged down the S&P 500. The indices of Nasdaq Composite and Dow Jones Industrial Average are also trading low. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.